Welcome to Newrealities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and tonight, as Hafiz says, the subject, like all nights, will be love, with Marianne Williamson. My name is Alan Steinfeld, and my program is called Newrealities. Each week, I go deep into the understanding of how we can start to change the planet, how new ideas can be presented to the world to unfold a greater civilization. Welcome to Newrealities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and this program is about the evolution of our consciousness, our spirit, our ways of being in the world where we're awakening to, as my guest says, the presence of the Holy Spirit. So that is why I'm so happy to be here with Marianne Williamson.
Thank you.
Thank you. And her new book, Tears to Triumph, is a really special book that you wrote because you've created a way of showing suffering and human emotion as a spiritual path. And this probably came out of your own path to awakening in some ways.
Well, I wouldn't say it's about suffering as a spiritual path, so much as that suffering is part of the human experience. And when you see the human experience in spiritual terms, then you realize that normal human suffering is part of it. There is a spectrum of normal human suffering. And what has happened over the last few years is that we have medicalized it. You know, mental illness is one thing, serious mental illness is one thing, schizophrenia, bipolar, and so forth. And the conversation around psychotherapeutic drugs, for instance, when you're talking about serious mental illness, is understandable.
Right.
But situational despair, you had a bitter divorce, you had a breakup, you lost your job, professional failure, financial loss, the death of a loved one, just being in your 20s. These things are difficult, but they're not mental illnesses.
Right. It's okay to feel a little depressed if you've lost a loved one.
Not only is it okay, it's natural. And sometimes neurosis is best delineated by what people are not upset about than it is by what people are upset about.
That's a good point.
These are very upsetting times. Look at what's happening with racial issues in the United States, criminal justice issues, out of control terrorism, climate change, economic inequality, a presidential election that's disheartening to say the least. If you're not deeply disturbed, I'm concerned about you. So what's happened now is that we have this new psychotherapeutic pharmacological industrial complex that has made a profit center over the fact that people are understandably upset.
So I don't want to get into conspiracies, but do you think it's a conspiracy?
No, it's right out in the open. People aren't noticing, but it's...
But, you know, the
because
pharmaceuticals make money by prescribing antidepressant drugs, which actually are damaging.
Well, nuances and specifics are important here. First of all, I celebrate, and I'm sure you do too, biomedical research as much as anyone does. I'm not, and also I have no judgment. In fact, I celebrate as much as anyone else the use of psychotherapeutic drugs for serious mental illness where it is helpful. What we're talking about here, which is part of a larger issue of the fact that global capitalism has just swerved out of all ethical center. We have gotten to the point where short-term economic gain is our God. So when you look at something like the overprescription, you know, people say there's an epidemic of depression. What there's an epidemic of is the overmedication of Americans.
Absolutely.
And particularly the overprescription of antidepressants. This is part of what you have when you have a market-based healthcare system. If we were, let's say, in a country like England or anywhere where there's a universal healthcare system, the investment is getting you off drugs that you don't need. In a market-based healthcare system, the investment is not only getting you on, but keeping you on.
It's a big social problem we have with the way our culture generates its profit, and that's a whole other discussion.
Well, we're living at a time where if it's a public issue, it will get to your private door. So this idea that you can put yourself in a little bubble over here and not be affected in some way, and then ultimately some really profound ways, by the larger social, political, economic, moral, and spiritual dysfunctions of our time, is a myth. And so information is power. The more you see what's going on in our world, you know, when years ago, if somebody had a problem with a teenager and they would take the teenager to a therapist, the therapist, it became part of mainstream understanding years ago, that the therapist would say, I can't just treat your child. I have to see the behavior of your child within the larger context of your family system. And so today we are expanding. Our primary psychotherapeutic model has been very much concentrated on the individual drama, the drama of that individual. Now we're expanding to go, you can't understand the drama of an individual today without recognizing the larger order that we're all part of and affected by. And it is not only dominated by fear, which is that's just the consciousness of the human race, but particularly in our society today. Minute after minute after minute, we are bombarded by data, by information, and by stimulus that repudiates the truth of who we are. We are spiritual beings, and we are constantly being told, you're not perfect as you are, but if you get this, you might be perfect. If you achieve that, you might be perfect. You might have worth. Other people are not here to collaborate with. They're here to compete with. You've got to make sure you go get yours. The value, the source of your happiness is outside you. By the way, it's a dangerous world out there. And in case you haven't noticed, you are getting older and you're going to die sooner than you'd like. So who's not like this? You know, who's not? You know, people say they have an anxiety disorder. Who doesn't?
Well, let's talk about the truth of who we are, because I think, yes, we live within a social fabric that is a disturbed society. Absolutely. But how do we understand the truth of who we are? Because we're not getting that in our schools, in our education, on media. There is the truth of who we are, and it is love, and it's pure, and it's been corrupted.
The issue of who we are is a spiritual issue, and we live in a very overly secularized society. So the life of the inner self is a subject that itself has been trivialized, it's been marginalized, it's been peripheralized in our society. It's not that anyone is doing it to you, but the spiritual path or psychotherapy, personal growth, transformation, this can be a religious pursuit, it can be thought of in spiritual but not religious terms, it can be thought of in secular terms. But it is the idea that there is an inner self, and that inner self is not at home in a world that is chaotic and random. And a world that is chaotic and random outside begins with a world that is chaotic and random inside, and your inner world is random and chaotic unless and until you see love as number one, the identity, who you truly are, your spirit of love, not just your body, and the purpose of your life. You know, we live in a world that tells you you have to figure out the source of your happiness as though it's outside yourself. And Buddha said that the things of this world can only bring temporary happiness. So everybody's in this struggle and grasping mode to get what they think would make them happy. So you're never really happy because you're going for it. It's over there somewhere. When you get the money, when you get the job, when you get the relationship, then even if you get it, as Buddha said, something outside yourself can only bring temporary happiness. So then even if you get it, the fairy dust will begin to rub off, and then you're in despair, because even having gotten it, it didn't bring you all the happiness you want. So then that same mental mindset says, oh, try to get something else or more of that, and that will fix it. So there are so many ways in which, because we've left the moral center of I am love and my only purpose is to love, we are doomed to the upset and depression and anxiety that emerges from that spiritual and mental fault line.
But isn't that the path of living in the world? Because we come from love. We are love. We are the essence of, from where we come from. We come into the world for a spiritual journey, in a way to forget, and so it empowers the love. But why do we forget?
But as we were saying, the entire human race, as we know it, is dominated by a perspective based on fear rather than love. And all the great religious and spiritual systems acknowledge this. Buddha, the beginning of his journey to enlightenment, began with his realization that life is suffering. The story of the Exodus in the New Testament, the foundational story, is that the Israelites were suffering as slaves in Egypt, and Jesus suffered on the cross. So all spiritual transmission begins with the realization. All of the great religious systems have at their core the recognition that this world lived outside the light of the divine, outside the light of a sense of our oneness with the Creator, oneness with the universe, oneness with the earth, oneness with each other, and oneness with our own true selves. Any life lived out of the circle of that understanding is painful. This is not something new. It's not something that the modern mind, we're so arrogant in the modern world, we think we've discovered a disease or something. This is the disease of human life until we close that gap. And that gap, you know, psychic pain is like physical pain. It conveys a message. Humanity would not have evolved over thousands and thousands of years without being imbued with the capacity to take a hit. The physical body has an immune system. If your immune system isn't working, you will not survive. The body, because of the immune system, can absorb quite a large amount of injury and disease. Psychically is the same. You know, humanity has been heartbroken and experiencing catastrophe for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. We have a psychic immune system, and that's what grief is. That's what upset is. That's what remorse is. It doesn't mean something's wrong. If you don't have remorse, you're a sociopath. If you don't have grief, you're not integrating and processing a painful experience. But because we've imposed this business model, the dictates of a business model on the human experience, we see grief like there's something wrong with being sad today. And that's the point. The point is not how do we get out of our sadness. The issue is how do we learn from our sadness? How do we grow wiser about our sadness? How do the lessons of those dark nights of the soul?
And how do we feel it? I mean, I think feeling the sadness to the depth of our being is that natural way of transmuting it.
Yeah, well, that's not what's currently in vogue.
No, but
what's currently in vogue is numbing ourselves to those deep feelings, distracting ourselves from those deep feelings. And also, I remember a time in our society when there was more social permission given to grieve, for instance. So now we're taking this cheap yellow smiley face, we pour it over everything. Happy, 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 as though there's something wrong with being sad.
But I learned that. I broke up with this woman once, and it's just so painful and so heartbreaking. I would feel in my body, and I said, instead of trying to do something bad, I'm just going to track the feeling in my body. And when I did that, it started to change. It was my own experiment.
Because you have a natural, once again, the body knows how to heal itself and the mind knows how to heal itself. And also, when you have a breakup, a bitter, painful divorce or breakup, the pain, this is one of the areas where you have to burn through the pain to get to the gain. For instance, 99.9% of relationships that break up did not involve just one person's issues. So part of the pain of a painful breakup is, if you're mentally and emotionally healthy, being willing to see what part of it was yours.
Exactly.
That's half the pain right there. You know, in Catholicism, they have confession. In Judaism, the holiest day of the year is the Day of Atonement. In AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, you have to admit the exact nature of your wrongs. Take that fearless moral inventory. After a relationship, what was my part? You have to burn through every cringe, if only I'd done this, if I hadn't done that. But once again, you need that sleepless night. Don't take a sleeping pill. You need to look at that. You need to, those nights, that's why we can't sleep, because you can shoo those demons away during the day more easily. But to burn through that, if you don't burn through that, how are you going to get to the point of knowing, I'm going to be different next time out? I'm not going to take a man for granted. I'm not going to take love for granted. I'm going to be more grateful. I'm going to be more understanding. I'm going to be less judgmental. How do you learn except in those dark times? So you have to learn to forgive yourself only through atoning for your errors and forgiving other people. But if you don't forgive other people when you've been through a painful situation, then you come out on the other side. You know, it's like you can be bitter or you can be better. And you cannot be happy and be a victim. You cannot not take responsibility for your life and be happy. You cannot be a victim and be happy. You cannot you cannot withhold forgiveness from others and be happy. So this whole thing of depression and sadness, we now recognize you can't trash your body, not care about diet, exercise, just wait till you get sick and hope that Western medicine can allopathically suppress or eradicate your symptoms. Sickness is the absence of health. Health isn't the absence of sickness. Same with happiness and sadness. Sadness is the absence of happiness. Happiness is not the absence of sadness. You can't just treat sadness. You have to cultivate happiness. And that you have to cultivate the capacity to forgive, to atone, to endure, to be patient, to be disciplined, to meditate.
And to feel what you're feeling because of the experience.
Yeah, but just feeling it, I think, let's
well,
not, but
the
I think,
depth of feeling.
yes,
Yeah.
however, I think that it's important to realize that if I am wounded, I am feeling the wound, but it's just as important as it is to understand that I must feel the wound, it is equally important to understand I don't have to act from the wound.
Right.
Because some people would say, because I feel angry.
No,
well,
no,
you know,
I'm
or
not
because
saying
I feel
acting out.
hurt.
Yes.
You know, there's discipline. Disciple and discipline come from the same root. That's why in the chapter on Buddha, the Eightfold Path, right speech, right action, right livelihood. So somebody might say, well, because I feel so bad, that's why I wrote that stupid email I'm going to address for the rest of my life.
I think feeling without acting out is part of the discipline of being. But on the other side of that, there's a kind of a spiritual syrup, like, oh, let's give it over to God. Like, that will take care. I mean, it's okay to give it over to God, but it stops people from actually going to the depth of it.
Well, I totally disagree
tell
with
me.
that.
No, when you give it to God, some people think that, okay,
if there's a
God
God,
will
he's
take
at least
care
as
of it.
smart as we are, Alan. You know what I mean? It's like, so, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Tell me what you mean.
Okay, what I mean is this. Let's say I'm very, very angry, and somebody just says, I need to feel the depth of my anger. That's very nice, because I do need to feel the depth of my anger. But if I stop there, I am more likely in the middle of the night to send a text, you frickin' son of a bitch. I am more likely to send the email. I'm more likely to make the phone call, which will only exacerbate the situation and make me feel worse later. To surrender to God by whatever name is to say, I am angry, but by definition, because the essence of myself is love, I am not in the essence of myself. I can't of myself make the bridge between my anger and my love. I don't want to deny my anger, because you're right, it has to come up through a detox, but I want to transcend it. I give it over to the hands of God. I am willing to see this differently. That's what it's about. It's not about denying our upset or our painful emotions, but it is about a willingness to transform them. You know, because there is a difference between denial and transcendence. And then what happens when you say, I am willing to see this differently? You are literally commanding, it's like commanding the forces. And it could be a book, it could be a song lyric, it could be something a friend says, it could be a movie, it could be a TV show, or it could just be a thought that occurs to you. You know what, Marianne? He didn't do everything wrong. And he did make efforts that you're not remembering at this moment. And you did actually tell him to leave. You forgot that part. Do you know what I'm saying? It's our own insanity involved in these things. So when you give something over to God, you were saying, I am willing to think the thoughts that right now my ego mind is keeping me from thinking, and to lessen my attachment to the thoughts that only hurt me.
So what does God mean to you? I mean, you use it a lot, of course, the Course in Miracles uses it, but what is the definition? How do you identify this God being presence for you?
I think AA has it right, God as you understand him, the idea, or her, or it, the idea of a higher power. The idea of a power that is inside us that can do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. The real spiritual path is where you really get, you're the problem, you're not the answer.
What is the purpose, you think, of incarnation? I mean, it's not to suffer, but suffering is a part. But why? If we come from love and return to love, what is the purpose of being here and separating from that love?
Well, you can't give a rational explanation for an irrational moment. So the separation, which the Course in Miracles says happened millions of years ago in terms of the evolution of the human race. But because time itself is an illusion, we are reenacting it every moment that we close our heart. So we are born ready to just love. And we are taught a mindset from the time we're babies that is completely upside down to who we are, where we base our perception of reality on the physical senses rather than the knowing of the heart. My physical senses tell me you're over there and I'm over here. That's what my physical eyes see, when in fact my inner vision knows there's no place where you stop and I start, because we are spirits. My physical ears might tell me, I didn't like what you just said to me, I didn't like what you just said to me, and I didn't like the way you said it. But my inner vision knows that if you weren't telling me something kind and loving, it's just because in that moment, because of your own triggers, because of your own childhood wounds, you didn't know how to download love and get your needs met. So I have a choice. Am I going to base my perception of this interaction on my physical senses, or know that if you weren't loving me, you were just making a call for love, and I can dwell in that attitudinal universe. So when you say, what is the purpose? The purpose is to remember who we are. Enlightenment is not a learning, it is an unlearning. It is a path of living that many people, millions and millions of people, whether from a religious perspective or a non-religious, non-spiritual, secular, whatever perspective, are getting, that the way we're thinking and living on this planet is increasingly dysfunctional, is increasingly unsustainable. And unsustainable is not an ugly enough word. It means you will die if you continue this way. And we are now living at a time in our country and on our world, on our planet, where the whole thing is unraveling. The whole thing is falling apart. It has to fall apart. The revolution has already begun. The only issue is this going to be a revolution of love, or is this going to be a revolution of fear? There's no escaping these revolutionary times. There's no escaping the upset of it. But it is now each and every one of our opportunity and responsibility to ourselves to make a choice. And you do make a choice every moment. You either make it consciously or unconsciously. Am I using the energy of my mind, my efforts, my livelihood, and my life to proactively move the needle, help move the needle in the direction of a loving change through being the presence of the alternative in whatever field I'm in, as an educator, as an artist, as a scientist, as a business person? Am I the presence of the new alternative, the new possibility, the new, more loving way? Or am I crouching into the cage where I've been assigned by myself, by my own ego, and by the world, where I'm so at the effect of my own cowardice and my own narrow thinking that I'm at the effect of the fear of the world, in which case, because there's really no such thing as a neutral thought, my energy is being used in the service of the fear of our times, and good luck with that. Hi, I'm Marianne Williamson, and you are watching Newrealities.
So happy to be here with Marianne Williamson, one of the natural inspirations of our spiritual movement. We're talking about her new book, Tears to Triumph, and I think suffering, as you say, can be used for an evolution.
Absolutely, because everything can be used either by the ego mind, which is the loveless mind, which is has an underlying intent of suffering, or by the spirit within us. When Buddha realized that life is suffering, this was the beginning of his journey of enlightenment, which culminated in his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree and the state of nirvana. When the Israelites were suffering as slaves in Egypt, that was the beginning of the story. Then they were delivered, went through the 40 years in the desert, ending up in the entrance into the promised land. Jesus suffered on the cross, but that began that 3-day journey to resurrection. So that 40 years symbolized in the Old Testament, or the 3 days symbolized in the New Testament, or the period of time that Buddha was fighting the demon of illusion, that means this period of time where we are suffering the craziness and insanity and fear and hatred of the world, but we are, through the changing of our own consciousness, moving into another place. That's where God comes in. So first there's the suffering of the world, then God plays his hand. It culminates in enlightenment, nirvana, promised land, resurrection, which all mean the same thing: self-actualization, inner peace, enlightenment, happiness, a world that works.
So you think we're
So you leave out the second part, and you've got to...
No, I think we're moving to that, because here we're in this time of suffering where the promised land is out there. I think, and you started with the Department of Peace and the work you've tried to do and politics and all that, that we can move to an enlightened society. Do you see that as a vision?
It's very important that we not forget. Look at the journey of the United States. We have, in many ways, transgressed against our own most cherished principles: genocide of the Native Americans, slavery, and so forth. But when you look at our political journey, we are a country that had slavery, then we are a country that abolished slavery. Women didn't have the right to vote, and then the women's suffrage movement gave us the right to vote. There was institutionalized white supremacy, and then there was the civil rights movement. Gay people had no right to marry, and then there was a struggle for marriage equality. But the point is, where would we be today if abolitionists hadn't been upset about it? Where would we be today if Susan B. Anthony had just known how to chill? You know, like, girl, don't create so much drama wherever you go. What is this new emotional flatline that everybody talks about like it's some kind of high spiritual order? It's not. The fact that these are disturbing times, this is how society moves forward. Abolitionists were not okay with slavery. Those women suffragists were not okay with women not being able to vote, and so forth. So when we have these times of what author Paul Hawken calls blessed unrest in ourselves and in our world, we are part of a larger evolutionary drive forward. So is it possible? Yes. And that's what's so important about these times. Let us not be the first generation of Americans who wimped out on doing the job that needed to be done to take a country and a planet that has so swerved from its ethical center and put it back on track. Admittedly, these are difficult times. These are difficult ones. It's not like there are easy answers.
Right.
But I wouldn't say abolitionists exactly had an easy job. I wouldn't say that women suffragettes had an easy job. And in every area, whether you're talking about criminal justice, racial issues, the fact that our democracy itself has become so rigged, the fact that even climate change, even with ISIL and international terrorism, if we do the deeper work, atoning for where we have made mistakes, which is an important part of it. You can't heal your own life and you can't heal the world without atoning for the mistakes, understanding how we got here, and then looking in all of those areas that I just mentioned. There are brilliant people who know what to do, who stand for the alternatives, who show best practices. The problem is they're not usually financed by our governments, because our governments are so often handmaidens to the other forces whose money is to be made on the things not getting better and so forth. This is not a time to be numb. This is a time to be awake. This is a time to be educated. This is a time to read. This is a time to think. This is a time to pray. This is a time to meditate. And we all do that and we'll kick ass and change this thing and everything will absolutely be fine.
I have great hope for this planet. That's why I do this program. That's why speakers like you are so impassioned. It's getting the word out, and it is making a change. We are affecting the consciousness. Something's shifting, and that's what's raising the problems to the surface, because we have to see the darkness, as you say, in order for the light to come. Or you think it's not?
No, it is, but I don't think this is a moment when the spiritual community can be in a self-congratulatory mood.
No, I'm not There's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But I think that there's a little deeper to go with that. Part of the shadow side of the spiritual movement is the denial of our own shadow. I think that if you have a clue as to what changes one heart, you do have a clue as to what changes the world. So we have a lot to contribute. I think that the people in the spiritual community are the last people who should be sitting out the great social and political issues of our day. And so I think that we have to tend to that. Absolutely. I think it's beginning to happen, but I think, it's not like we don't all know the principles now. We've kind of articulated them. Everybody's read the same book. I think now we need to, with each other, really not so much ask you what your disorder is ask you if you meditated today and if you've forgiven. Too many times if people go to therapy today and you have a problem with your relationship, how many times will the therapist say, is this relationship really giving you everything you need? When the question the therapist should be asking is, are you really giving this relationship everything you have?
Right.
Or too often you go somewhere today into a conversation with a counselor or someone and you say you're upset. Not enough counselors or friends will then say, who haven't you forgiven? We're still putting it too much like, making ourselves.
Well, that's what's so good about your work. It's doing the personal work. Yeah. Where have you not forgiven people? Where have you not acknowledged the shadow? And that's a spiritual path.
That's right, and rising to the occasion and taking responsibility for your part and holding yourself accountable and just growing up. We have a crisis of adulthood in the United States. Too many men are still acting like boys, and too many women are still acting like girls.
So what do you suggest?
I think it's happening. I just think we all need to step it up a little.
So it's only when we're brought to our knees can we raise ourselves up and be changed by that intensity of feeling that we...
Well, you know, you got to have a big, if you're going to have a big building in the sky, there's got to be a big hole in the ground first. And this is not to glamorize suffering.
No,
You know, it's
we're
not
not
like you
talking about
have to suffer, but in order to come to consciousness, I don't believe, but I think it's true if most of us are honest with ourselves, we have chosen that way. But hey, through the, you know, every generation stands on the shoulders of the one before it. So hopefully through reading, through learning from others, we can learn to be wise by learning from other people's experiences and not having to crash and burn ourselves so often.
And we're shaped by our experiences and
our joy.
And our pain.
All of it. It's all part of being human.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you.
For your beauty and your courage
Thank
to
you.
say what needs to be said.
Thank you.
And to write a book that will help people move through their pain and see that we're all part of the Holy Spirit. That we are
By whatever name we
essence.
call it. You know, I'm a
Right.
Jewish girl. And so,
I'm
you
a
know,
Jewish person too.
by whatever name we call
But
it.
the Holy Spirit is the God divinity within.
Absolutely. Nirvana, resurrection,
Yes.
Holy Spirit. Go to Marianne.com for more information.
Right. No, and there's so much more. And we'll do more. We'll do more.
Thank you.
Thank